What is up, everybody? Jacob here, and today we are back with another stab at HackingHub. In today's video, we're going to be tackling the Smallmart lab on the platform, which is actually a white box code review lab. So whether you're preparing for the OSCP or the OSWE, God forbid, or you're just looking to learn to improve your code review practices, this is a great lab. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now, the astute of you would notice that I have VS Code open, and that's because HackingHub actually provides you with source code for this lab. Now, before we dive in, I need to make a disclaimer that I am absolutely not a developer in any shape, way, or form. I am a penetration tester and professional security consultant. However, I do think that this is a great skill to learn for all security professionals, even in the age of AI. Now, the code is only around 200 lines long, so we're going to dive in real quick. Now, interestingly enough, we have an admin password and admin username that's defined as global variables up at the top here. This is obviously just fake for testing. The real application is going to be running the real admin password. So going down, I'm actually going to start with the registration route, and we're going to be poking through some of these functions for, your standard web application security vulnerabilities, injection attacks, authorization bypasses, and the like. Now, this registration function is pretty stock standard. There's a couple of interesting things here though. For example, it blocks you from registering if you do not have a username and password entered. And interestingly enough, it does a comparison against admin, lowercase. And if you try and register a user with admin, it actually gives you an error saying this username is reserved. So interesting that they used admin instead of just directly using the admin username variable from above. But again, this is a CTF. I'm not going to judge the coding practices too stringently. We do have some SQL interactions as well, but these are not vulnerable to SQL injection. And you can actually see this by the fact that the queries are parameterized over here. Parameterization of queries is, of course, the silver bullet against SQL injection. It prevents SQL injection attacks, and we would have a different scenario, for example, if user input was getting directly concatenated into a string, but this does look safe against SQL injection. Moving on to login, we do see similar functionality here for the username and password being required. Similar functionality in terms of database interactions, also not vulnerable against SQL injection. But this line 156 did catch my eye, and the reason for that is because they directly compare the password that's entered from the front end with password from the database, which implies to me that no hashing is being conducted on the passwords. They are being stored in plain text in the database, which is definitely not an ideal security practice. Line 160 also caught my eye because there's a comparison with username and admin username. So if you do log in with the admin username, which is just admin, successfully somehow, you will actually get an error saying this account is locked, okay? Which is rather interesting to me as well. Other than that, though, there wasn't that much interesting with the login functionality, so we're left with logout and /admin, which is presumably an admin portal. Now, the admin portal is quite interesting. If you do try and log in with no user or access it with no user, you immediately get redirected to the login. But this line 185 caught my eye immediately because it says, if not is admin username, then access denied. And that implies to me that this application is potentially doing authorization checks based on the username instead of being based on a role or proper authorization framework, which is really not an ideal thing for access control. Now we're going to take a look at this isAdmin username function, and we're going to confirm our suspicions over here. You can see over here that the function is a simple one-liner. It just returns true or false for whether there's a regex match to admin, and it passes in the flags ignore case. Now that is really not ideal. We're not comparing against any framework over here. There's no robust authorization controls being implemented. It's literally just a one-liner regex check. So we're going to see if we can bypass this regex check and break this application's logic. Now, the very first thing you want to do is probably have a look at the documentation for this library, the Python RE library. Now, I spent some time looking through this documentation and settled on this interesting piece of information about the re.ignore case flag. It says over here, note that when Unicode patterns A to Z or A to Z are used in combination with the ignore case flag, they will match the 52 ASCII letters and 4 additional non-ASCII letters, which is super interesting because it means that this I, this Latin capital letter I, the Turkish or Latin dotless I, and a couple of other letters here are going to essentially be compared as equal with their ASCII alternatives. Now, why this is interesting is because in the code, if you recall directly, in the registration function, it did a comparison, a string comparison against admin. So we can actually register a user over here with the username admin with a dotless I, and it's not going to protest or complain because that's not equal to ASCII admin. But when we go ahead and log in with this profile over here, when we actually do the regex check in the admin panel, it is in fact evaluated to equal to ASCII admin because of that little condition that we just spotted in the documentation. And that's allowed us to essentially bypass this check and gain access to the administrator panel and the flag. So definitely not ideal in any situation. If you're writing authorization for your application, always make sure that you're using a proper authorization library that's been like a vetted third-party library, using a proper authorization framework. Do not do access control checks based on usernames. So that was a cool lab with an interesting little exploit, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you found it interesting and learned something, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And definitely go and check out HackingHub. Once again, I'm not sponsored by HackingHub. I just like the platform. I think they offer a lot of value, and I really would consider recommending everybody to go and check it out. But otherwise, thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you in the next video.